So I think what I'll do is just say, to get us started, that this session is really about asking a lot of questions. I'm Nancy Norbeck. I am a creativity coach, and I definitely do not have a lot of answers about what's going on in terms of guru culture and power right now, but I have a lot of questions. And I think that this is a conversation that is really, really important to have. So, you know, somebody needs to start it. I'm sure other people are starting it too, but I just felt really called to start the conversation. So here we are. Hi, Jamie. I am going to just kind of dive in, I think, because there are things that, in order to keep my own sanity, because I don't know how many people will show up and what chat might look like, there are some things that I want to preface things with my own thoughts and what I'm observing before we get into whatever Q&A ends up looking like. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about my own context and what I'm seeing to get us rolling. Feel free to throw comments in the chat and I will come back to them when I get to the end of this, as makes sense. So, my own personal context, as you may have seen in my post on Friday, is that about a year ago, I wrote a post called Beware the Guru. And that post came out of my own experiences in two different business coaching programs that I had been in at that point, and the power dynamics that I noticed in them. And as interesting as those were to me, and as much as they alarmed seems like a bit of a strong word, but they bothered me, shall we say. The one that alarmed me the most didn't end up being the one that was actually the most dangerous. The one that seemed like the better one at the time is the one that actually caused me more harm, financial harm, um, possibly confidence harm. And it turned out, when I did the math last night, I thought I had only been scammed twice. I've actually been scammed 3 times by business coaches, which is a bit alarming. There, the word does apply. I hope that that means that I have learned my lesson, but I got scammed by the one that I thought was the safer one. So that tells you that while I may be able to see patterns, that doesn't necessarily mean that I judge them appropriately in terms of which one is the more dangerous one. But that is what I noticed a year ago. And when I told people that I was in those programs with about what I was concerned by, I largely got, oh no, I think that they're being really helpful and they really care about what people get out of these programs. And so, was kind of shut down, even in a very nice way. But now I think maybe people would be a little bit more willing to listen now that we've seen what's coming out in terms of the Epstein files and the fact that Deepak Chopra was named in there thousands of times. And then a couple weeks ago, Lissa Rankin posted her article where she talked about Deepak Chopra, and then she named names, many names. She told stories. She let the whole cat out. Actually, maybe not the whole cat, because she says she's got more stories to tell. And if you haven't read her post, I linked it in my post on Friday. I really recommend it. It is eye-opening. It was certainly eye-opening for me. Not all of it was terribly surprising for me, but some of the names that were on there surprised me to varying degrees. Um, the one that simultaneously surprised me and didn't surprise me is the one that I followed for 30 years, and that was Martha Beck. And she's the one that I have been wrestling with the most in multiple ways, and I think we'll probably talk about that. So the questions that have come up for me are questions like, why do we elevate people in the first place? We put people on a pedestal, but why? And when we elevate people to these positions, are we elevating them or are we elevating their work? Or are we elevating this sense that we have that they are somehow better than we are? Because I don't think that these people are better than we are. I think there are very few people who are actually better than we are. And when we do that, we seem to equate moral performance with credibility, because it's very clear that someone like Deepak Chopra was performing morality, because behind the scenes, that's not what was happening. And so that contributes to this whole perception that, you know, these people are somehow better than we are. And in a case like Deepak Chopra, and he's the one I'm going to come back to because there are more details about him than anybody else. Um, we have this whole guru culture, this guru dynamic, and we are especially susceptible to that in America, which is where things overlap with the susceptibility to cults in America, which Daniela Mestiniak-Young says is because we have given up community for whiteness. And so we have this whole rugged individualism thing, which I have always thought was the biggest bill of goods ever sold to the American public, that says that we have to handle absolutely everything ourselves, which is not only ridiculous, it's literally impossible. But it separates so much separates us so much from each other that we are missing this sense of community and belonging. And that's one of the first things that cults give to people. Now, again, I want to say I am not an expert in cults. I don't have all the answers here, but I certainly have been reading a lot more and learning a lot more. I've been following her on YouTube. She is a cult expert. She is a survivor of the Children of God religious cult that she grew up in. And she's got a degree in organizational psychology that she got deliberately with the intention of becoming a cult scholar. So she's pretty well credentialed. And her second book, The Culting of America, has just come out, and I've just started reading it. It's fascinating. So that's where she comes from. Amanda Montell also says the same thing in her book. She says that cults have much greater traction in the US because we do not have the social safety net that other countries have. And so people turn to religion and religious groups to try to fill that void. Um, so that's that question. And Jamie, I see your question, and we'll come back to that. But then there's also the question of, you throw in marketing on top of spirituality and celebrity, and what happens when you put those three things together. Again, I don't have answers, but my gut says probably nothing good. So I think we have this perfect storm of factors that come together and create these power dynamics, and trouble ensues because power distorts. I mean, we see this with all the conversation about billionaires. People have all of this money, and what does it do to them? Nothing good. And, and you see it even in smaller places. I worked with a teaching colleague once who used to talk about little people with little pieces of power and what it did once people had these little pieces of power. And I've certainly seen that in workplaces where as soon as someone got promoted from the bottom of the org chart to the next level, it seemed to completely change their personality. So power messes with people's psychology, and no one is immune to cults and cult dynamics. I mean, I think I know I'm not. I've I got scammed 3 times, and that's part of it, right? Because I got taken in by what they were selling me. And I'm not saying that the groups that sold me on stuff were cults, but there were weird power dynamics going on there where the people who were in charge were elevated as if they knew everything. And that's what alarmed me about them once I got inside them. Um, I think it's the people who insist that they're immune. And if you hang out on, like Daniela Mestiniak-Young's YouTube or TikTok or whatever, there are always the people in the comments who talk down about the people who have survived cults like there's something wrong with them. And everyone who talks about getting out of a cult says it can happen to anyone. And even on her new book, the very first line, I think, says you're probably in a cult, you just don't know it yet. Because there are different levels and different kinds, and they are so pervasive. So, look down on cult survivors at your own risk, really. Um, And I think along with the power, there's also the perfectionism angle, because purity and perfectionism are so close, right? We think we want this level of perfection, and in order to have that perfection, you have to be this pure creature. And there is no such thing as purity, right? There is no such thing as a pure human being. I'm pretty sure that purity can only exist in a chemistry lab. Many years ago, there was a great episode of Babylon 5 that illustrated that there's no such thing as a pure biological creature beautifully, and it has stayed with me, and I'm so glad that I saw it then so that it could be a formative experience for me. Like, there is nothing pure about any human being except that we are all human beings, right? And yet we demand purity, we project purity, we punish imperfection, even though there's not a single perfect one among us. And it creates this whole cycle. And one of the things that I'm really wrestling with Martha Beck, who, comparatively speaking, I mean, she's not in the Epstein files. She just has some unsavory personality traits, is like, okay, so she's not a nice person. She doesn't treat people well. But what about the actual work? Because I think that her work is valid, and yet I hear myself say that, and I'm like, but am I just biased? And I don't know. I don't think I have a good way to tell. But she is a sociology PhD, and I do believe that she researches a lot of her work pretty well. You know, her last book has a pretty solid bibliography. But, you know, at a certain point, if we throw out the work of everyone who had any kind of personality flaw, we will throw everything out until we end up back in the Stone Age, because no one who has ever created anything was perfect. I mean, I was thinking the other day about Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who both had major, major personality deficiencies, but did work that has improved the lives of many, many people, especially as it's been distilled over time. If we throw them out, then we have no psychotherapy. So is that really what we want to do? You know, and so it seems to me that's not the answer. So I think we need to wrestle with that. Like, what's the right answer to that? And at the same time, you know, we need to hold people accountable. So somehow we have to hold them accountable and figure out what to do with their work and figure out what parts of their work are valid, right? Because if someone has done work that is verifiable, then it seems to me probably their work should stick around. Somebody like Deepak Chopra, I don't know if you can verify the work that he has done. And probably when you look at it, does it look the same now as it did before when you know what he was actually doing behind the scenes? I think it probably doesn't. So, you know, there's it's difficult. I don't think that you want to hold spirituality to a rigorous scientific method kind of test. But at the same time, how do you evaluate that kind of work? It's a tough question. I don't know the answer. So you hold the person accountable, but we have to figure out what to do with the work, because abuse of power matters, and definitely being in the Epstein files matters. And it's not like he just took a trip on a plane and took a donation. That's not what was in those files at all. So that's in there, along with the fact that we are all just human beings. Every single one of us is flawed. And that brings me to, like, the biggest lesson that I have learned from doing a podcast for going on 8 years and talking to people who are, you know, not the folks that you're going to see in the movies if you go out to the cinema this weekend, but still, you know, people who've been on TV, is that they're all just people. They're all just people, and their job just happens to land them on TV, and yours probably doesn't. But they're all just people. And when we treat them like they're not just people, first of all, the interpersonal interaction becomes really weird. But, there's something that I think is unfair to them and unfair to us because it puts them in this awkward place on a pedestal. And, you know, I I was thinking about this the other day and I thought, how much responsibility does the public bear for putting people up on this pedestal and what that does to them? But then at the same time, once the people are put on that pedestal, does that change their perception of us when we've put them there? I think it probably does. So the pedestal and how we put people on it, it changes our perception of them and it changes their perception of us. And I don't think it does anybody any good when we do that. So, we kind of need to figure out where the lines are here, and I don't think any of them are easy, and I think a lot of them are very fuzzy. And so again, I don't have a lot of answers. I think that, you know, we need to figure out how to reconcile what we're learning about these folks with the influence that they've had in our lives and to separate the work from the people who brought it to us if we can. I've been following Martha Beck for 30 years. I don't know if I can pull out all of the influence that she's had on my life in 30 years. I think it would be very, very hard. And in her case, I'm really wrestling with to what extent do I need to do that and to what extent do I not? I don't know. I haven't landed there myself. And the downside of this kind of semi one-sided format is that I can't really hash that out with you as easily. And we all seem to want to make everything an easy black and white these days, and that doesn't help us here either. I do want to share with you one paragraph from Martha Beck's former CEO that she left on Lissa Rankin's post, corroborating a lot of that post, particularly in relationship to Martha Beck, but just in general in what she had seen in the industry. And she said, "While I cannot corroborate everything that Lissa has shared here, I can relate to all of it and have had enough similar experiences to know that this is how the industry really is. The shit talking, the insecurity, the racism, the sheer amount of bullshit and off the charts narcissism, and the lengths these people will go to protect their reputations, which would all be normal human stuff if these people weren't pretending to be above it all. That's what rankles. I can't tell you how many people I've coached who were holding themselves to some standard of success or spiritual purity that just did not exist." And I think to me that is the core of the problem. All of this, maybe not all of it, the Deepak Chopra thing, not all of it, but all of it, a lot of it is normal human stuff that nobody would think twice about if folks weren't pretending to be something that they can't actually be. And that's the part that has really made me sit and think about how I wanna be in this world, in how I run my business and how I interact with people. And again, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot in the last year from the time I wrote that post, from having been scammed a couple of times. You know, I don't ever want to make somebody feel like I have felt in that position. I am deeply committed to running my business in an ethical way, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it feels better to me. It's easier to know that I'm running things in an ethical way and that, you know, if I'm running things ethically, I don't have to worry as much about how many things could go wrong in that frame. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes and I want to own up to those mistakes. If I screw up, I want somebody to tell me so that I can do something about it. But if the foundation is that I've got that ethical framework in place, then that should minimize that possibility. And to own up to the fact that I'm human, like I said, I don't have the answers here. I just want to open the conversation. So that's my my starting point. And I'm really, really curious to hear what you guys have to say and what you think. So, um, Jamie, can she prove her information? I think Daniela Mestiniak-Young is one of the best cult scholars out there. She is the author of Uncultured, which I have not read yet because it is her memoir of the Children of God religious cult and also her experience in the US Army, which she went into after she left the cult. And she's the one who basically got into the army and said, "Oh, hey, this feels kind of familiar." And so she looks at both through the lens of a cult, and that is how she eventually decided to go become a cult scholar. So this is her bread and butter. And so far I can tell you that The Culting of America is incredibly well resourced. She's got a 38-page bibliography in there. I haven't looked at the bibliography in detail, and so I can't tell you specific sources for that particular quote because she said that in a video the other day too, but I'm sure that it's in there. I haven't gotten that far into the book yet, but I think, if she's got a citation for it, it's in the book, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's in there because she seems pretty dedicated to citing everything that she's got. So I'll have to say, stay tuned on that one. But I will also say that when I started reading the book yesterday, one of my first thoughts was I could totally see doing a book club for this. So it's a possibility. But I haven't read Uncultured yet just because I know it's going to trigger the crap out of me and I probably need to take it really, really slowly. So there's that. Other books that I have read that I recommend are Amanda Montell's Cultish. And also, right after I read that book last year, I read Barbara Ehrenreich's book, Bright-Sided, which is not explicitly about cults, and yet it's all about the toxic positivity that has been rampant in the US. It came out in 2009, so it's an older book. But while it's not explicitly about cults, it really kind of is. So I recommend both of those because they're both really, really eye-opening. And the only thing that I would say to keep an eye out for with Cultish, the thing that made me kind of is the same thing that Daniela Mestiniak-Young mentioned when she recommended the book, is that Amanda Montell talked to somebody who told her that brainwashing is not a real thing. And I thought, I'm pretty sure that it is. So that is the only thing in that book that I think is a little suspect, but that one's pretty well sourced too. So those are the ones that I've read that I would recommend. So, and also if you want to check out Daniela Mestiniak-Young on YouTube, she's Knitting Cult Lady and she's great. So, Kim, yeah, sorting the message from the messenger for yourself. And that's exactly where I'm like, what is there to do with this Martha Beck thing with me? And part of me says, I think she's pretty harmless. But again, is that just me being biased? It's really, really hard to tell. And I deliberately sat down the other day and listened to a couple of her new podcast episodes just to see how I reacted to them. And I was more like, are you just being cutesy now than I normally would be? So I'm kind of curious to see how I react over time and, go from there. The most interesting thing for me when I read about her in Lissa Rankin's post was how surprised I wasn't. Because she, for a couple of years, maybe more than a couple, I don't know, has been going on about Byron Katie and how great Byron Katie is. And every time she does it, I just start screaming internally. And it's bothered me a lot. And then maybe a year ago, she said something on a podcast about how she read somewhere else that, if there's somebody that you agree with 100% of the time, congratulations, you're in a cult. And I thought, well, then I guess I'm not in your cult, Martha, because I can't stand it when you talk about Byron Katie. That said, I was still there for everything else. So, not 100% on board, but still 30 years of that. It's a long time. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell. And now at least I'm looking at it with a more skeptical eye, and we'll see where it all falls out. So I'm not sure what the neurotypical brilliance comment was about, Kim, but if you remind me, we'll go back there. And yeah, the highlight reel versus behind the scenes is a real thing. It's a very, very real thing. So, you present this front to everybody, and the impulse is really strong, especially in, business coaching and marketing stuff. You're supposed to put your best foot forward and all of that kind of stuff. And I've always found it kind of a mixed message in business coaching that, oh, be authentic, but also, get your new headshots and they should be great and wonderful and beautiful. And it's like, okay, but is that really authentic? Like what's the real message here? How am I supposed to do both of these things at the same time? Like, do you really want to know how messy my guest room is right now? Like, what is the real message here, and how am I supposed to do the one without doing the other? And they're often really, really not clear about that. And I think especially when you're new, it's really, really easy to fall into that trap of go pretend that you're the thing that you're not because that's what's going to get you the clients, and then you end up having these conversations that just don't feel good because you're told to, overcome the objections and all of this stuff. It's like, okay, but that feels really scummy and I don't want to do that. So you end up trying to live the highlight reel instead of the actual behind the scenes. And it doesn't lead anywhere particularly good. I would rather just be me for myself. So, oh, I see. Great minds making great strides for humanity. Neurotypical folks are not typically confirmative to our norms of perfection. Yeah. Yeah. I think we need, all kinds, all coming in their own ways. That quote about great minds think alike drives me crazy because it's not true at all. If that were true, we wouldn't have so many inventions that came through all sorts of completely different thought processes from different different kinds of brains and different ways of thinking. And yeah. So, I don't know, what else are you guys thinking? How has all of this been hitting you? Because I know everybody's got their own experience coming into this conversation. Kim, I agree. A circle and a bottle of wine would be a great way to discuss this. It really, really would. I picked this because it seemed like an easy way to get a conversation going, but there is merit to something more interactive for sure. For sure. Yeah. And if there's interest, I certainly would be game to set up a discussion group or a book club, or, if you're interested in any of those books or something else, I'm open to ideas. Jamie, is that a vote for the circle and the bottle of wine idea? Yeah, podcast would be a great idea too. Though it would largely be I don't have a lot of answers. 'Cause I definitely don't. Yeah, we could totally do a discussion group because I think that this is gonna ripple out through at least through, I mean, the wellness world has been an issue for a while now. It's really at least since COVID, maybe before. I mean, there's been a wild amount of mis and disinformation coming through the wellness world for a good long while, and it really ratcheted up through COVID, and then it's also become, a political pipeline for the right wing. And so that's a whole problematic thing on its own. But then when you throw in the rest of the personal development and then the spirituality angle with people like Byron Katie and Deepak Chopra, and that's not all of them by any stretch. I mean, Lissa Rankin's post was full of folks from Hay House because she was a Hay House author for a while, and then she left them because she saw how problematic that was, and that's a whole different story. There's a great conspirituality podcast episode about that from 2020. It's episode 22 with her and an author named Rebecca Baruchi talking about the racism at Hay House. That was definitely eye-opening. And, at one point, I read a fair bit of stuff that came out of Hay House, and it was Leonie Dawson, maybe back around that same time, around 2020, who, mentioned on a group call or a podcast or something that she reached a point where she would go into a bookstore and pick up a book that looked interesting and turn it around, and if she saw that the publisher was Hay House, she put it down because she knew there wouldn't be a single fact in it. And I thought, yeah, yeah, I think you're right. Because I have definitely reached that point where back in the 90s when the whole personal development and new age and everything was coming out and coming together was all kind of new and exciting. And that all seemed great. But at this point, a lot of it just seems like it's a bunch of woo-woo nonsense. And I'm not against woo-woo stuff, depending on what it is. There's certain kinds of woo-woo that I kind of like, but I'm also very left-brained, and in the last year or so, I'm just weary of the stuff that just sounds like it's victim blamey nonsense. And so it's like, no, I'm not here for the law of attraction stuff that says that you created your own misery. I mean, yeah, you can certainly contribute to it in certain ways, but if you know if somebody drops an entire roll of insulation through your dining room ceiling, as happened to me last year, I'm pretty sure I didn't make that happen. I think that was somebody else's clumsiness. So, I think that it goes way too far to be useful and becomes another thing that Lissa Rankin talks about a lot, spiritual bypass, where you just pretend that everything's wonderful, even if it's not. That's not useful. That's a great way for people who are getting away with stuff they shouldn't get away with to get away with it. That's not healthy. So, yeah, it was no surprise to me that there were a lot of Hay House people on her list. And so, yeah. Kim, who are you looking to interview? Lissa Rankin or Leonie Dawson, or both? Yeah, I don't know her, but I did take an IFS course with her a couple months ago. It was fantastic. But I really relate to your comment about a lifetime of trying to hand off your power. Yeah. I really, in the last couple of years, am becoming more and more firm about, don't you dare hand your power to somebody else. I don't want it. Don't you dare try to give it to me. I'm not taking it from you, even if you want me to. I want you to take your power back. And if I can help you to take your power back, I will do that. But I don't want your power. I want you to take your power and use it and do amazing things with it. That's what it's for. It's way too much of people taking other people's power in this world, and that's not how it's supposed to be. So, yeah, I'm not surprised we have some Hay House Me Too in common. I think a lot of people have a lot of Hay House Me Too in common. I think they have a lot to answer for. And they are being, again, suspiciously quiet, just like they were when they refused to make a statement after George Floyd in 2020. So It's disappointing, but not surprising. Anybody have anything else? Any thoughts on any of those questions? I knew I threw a whole lot at you. Or should we just plan to set up a Zoom call, which is completely fine. Well, if nobody has anything else, then I think that's what I have for today. But I am completely cool with the idea of setting up a group call. So, I kind of think I would like to keep it small to start. So, actually, if you're here and you're interested in that, leave a note in the chat real quick so I know. Because I did a group call yesterday and we had some interlopers and it wasn't great. So, I want to make sure that because this could be a sensitive conversation, so I want to keep it as safe a call as possible. And I think only invite people that we know want to be there, at least to start. So I think if you're watching this later and you're interested in that, send me a note. But we'll look into that. And yeah, bots in Zoom calls, not a good thing. Um, and if you're interested in a book club idea, we can explore that too, with the proviso that not an expert at all. So it's a peer led thing, not an expert led thing, with probably more questions than answers. But again, I think there's a lot of value in asking the questions and exploring them, even if you don't actually come up with an answer. So, all right. Well, we'll leave it there and see what we come up with from that. So, thank you for joining me, and we'll go from here. See you later.